We're happy to see you here. We work at the Communication Space Center, and among our visitors are children with multiple developmental disabilities who have several issues communicating. Severe disabilities, which means that they have complex obstacles to communication that make us invent and use various additional means of communication to establish a contact. We both are psychologists, and we're going to tell you about our practice. Unfortunately, we do not visit museums that often, although we do, and we think that this is a great environment for our members, for our children, and we're going to have a lot of examples from everyday situations, like shopping. So we may think all together about how to use this in a museum environment. Before we move on to alternative communication itself, we would like to highlight communication features and peculiarities in different conditions. There may be different forms of disabilities, but they can all be grouped into 4 categories. Number 1, learning disabilities. In those cases, people would like to communicate. They want to express themselves. They are able to grasp others' emotions, and they want to have an emotional contact. It's rather easy to establish this contact with them and to talk to them. Group number 2, ASDs, autistic spectrum disorders. They have already been highlighted in detail. Maybe I'm repeating what others have said, but in communication, those people may look stiff and shut from the outside, and for these people, a common feature is having struggles with eye contact. It may provoke anxiety in such people, because other individuals seem chaotic, bringing in chaos to their life, breaking their plans, and hard to understand. It's difficult for them to take another person's perspective, to understand what they think, because we usually don't have any problems understanding others' thoughts and values and finding common ground with them. For individuals with ASDs, it's hard to perform this task. In communicating with them, it's better to be more delicate, to be more sensitive to their expressions, and not to overwhelm them with one's own communication. Make pauses, letting them adjust to you before you begin communicating in full. But still, you have to stick to the structure. You have to be clear. Yes, they're being shut, apparently, doesn't mean that they don't want to communicate. They're anxious, but they may be interested in communicating as well. Motoric disabilities, this might combine with intact intellect. Cerebral palsy, for example, does not affect intellect in many cases, and it's important to consider when beginning a contact not to offend an individual with this kind of disability. Some individuals with cerebral palsy or other motoric disabilities are perceived by others as having lower intellectual potential. And this is why they are marginalized and stigmatized and pushed to the outside from social contexts. In addition, these disabilities often lower the speed of perception, the speed of communication, the rate of action, and so they can't follow the tempo of other people, and so they are marginalized by this. It's common in them that they have sensory disability combined with motoric, seeing, hearing, visual fields, and so on. And so in sensory disabilities, in sensory impairments, the intelligence can also be intact. This must be considered in all cases. I think this is quite familiar to you, so we're not going to dwell on this for long. I remember that Garage had special training programs for those who educate people with these disabilities. So you see those 4 categories here, but there are a lot of people with various impairments that have a combination of those cases, of those features. A person with motoric disability can also have ASD. People on the spectrum, on the other hand, can have sensory impairments. So this all creates obstacles for communication and complicates the situation even more. So what is alternative and augmentative communication? This is everything besides speech. Speech, as well as alternative communication, follows us through our whole lives. As examples of alternative communication, we can name smileys, traffic signs, signs for toilet, male, female, accessible. Everything that provides us with information outside spoken word. This is all alternative and augmentative communication. We can separate these things into 2 groups, things that we use in direct communication, like smileys, and visual support means. But this dichotomy is not as important for us here in our short talk. Augmentative communication is communication that implies speech happening at the same time or soon after, but alternative means are used, such as gestures and signs, pictures, braille, things, physical items, and so on. And now you can turn on the video, an example of use of alternative communication in everyday life, such as shopping. So that's a short video with an example. What alternative communication can there be? Our spoken words are a system for exchange of information. We convey meanings to each other using our hearing organ, auditory organ. We have 5 main senses. These are hearing, vision, taste, smell, and touch. If one of the organs is not functioning properly, why not use the others? We can complete the same tasks using the other organs. For example, using touch, we can communicate using space touch symbols like Braille, or we can use things to symbolize events, a spoon to symbolize eating, a shoe to symbolize walking out. And if a child does not understand spoken word, they can touch the item and understand what's going on. They can feel the weight, the texture, the shape. And so, in cases of impaired hearing and impaired vision, the touch is still accessible and available. Here on the picture you see our New Year session. The children come for a class. You see a rope that signifies sitting in a circle. We see a symbol for drinking and a symbol for Santa Claus coming. You see me in a fancy costume. This all means that today is a day of celebration. Something unusual is going to happen, besides usual things. When hearing is not accessible, but vision is intact, then photos can be used for communication, or pictures, or abstract symbols. We're going to see how it looks. Not yet, do not switch yet. If we have vision with motoric function intact but no hearing, sign languages can be used, because then the vocabulary always follows the speaker without any need for cards or things. And a written text is also an alternative means of communication, because it's not spoken word. So alternative communication is the same as spoken language, but it uses different means. It is not different from everyday speech. It fulfills the same roles. You can ask for things. You can comment on weather or on environment or a museum. You can ask people to move on in their presentation. You can ask for water to drink. It does not differ from everyday spoken language. It differs only in form. So you shouldn't be afraid of these means of communications. They can proceed quite naturally if no one is afraid. So that's the photos that we use. Photos of nuggets can mean that I want to have nuggets for dinner. Pictures of people can substitute addressing them by name. If a person does not use spoken word, they can use a picture as an address form. You can ask for a toy. There are limitations, but they are universally understandable. Graphic symbols, more abstract than those. They can be divided into levels of abstraction. Simpler, colored pictures on the photo above. They look like the items, and they are cards. So a person can hand this card in to ask for something, or create a sequence of them as a sentence. They can be even more abstract, as in the photo below. Here you see this stickman symbolizing a human person. This is a more abstract level. The greater the intellectual disability is, the more concrete, less abstract symbols will be used. So we move from things to more and more abstract symbols, which lose color step by step and get closer to texts. And one more thing to say here is that alternative and augmentative communication does not mean that no speech is used. Speech should be used parallel to alternative communication, to signs, because there are sign languages which unify signs and additional symbols and pictures, as the Makaton code. which uses both signs from Russian Sign Language in a simplified manner to simplify understanding for people with learning disabilities. So all alternative communication presupposes accepting cases of using sign language for the deaf. It always implies the user's spoken word when it is accessible. It is a means of supporting spoken communication. Another system or vocabulary, Bliss symbolics. It's the most abstract system of such symbols. It follows the rules of Chinese characters, and it was used first for communication in 1950s. Here you have seen 3 vocabularies of various graphical symbols. There are a lot of such vocabularies. They differ in volume. And we have been asked how to use alternative communication in a museum. Graphical symbols are very numerous, and people who come to you, your visitors, may have different native vocabularies. So, a universal system for pictures, as above or below, is probably impossible. A more universal means for a museum would be to use photos, because photos are clearly understandable to everybody, and they're easier to associate with things that happen in real life. But the photos should exclude background. For example, if you mean a certain object. If you see a seesaw and a tree on a picture, then the visitor, the reader, could not understand where to look. The seesaw may be interpreted as a tree because the tree is there at the background. They will miss the seesaw in the foreground. We cannot know this beforehand, that's why we limit the image on the photo to what is important to be shown. That's important to consider. If you want to use photos in a timetable, in a schedule, then it's important to exclude people. Only things should be shown, because if people are present in the picture, it may be hard for the reader to understand that other people may really do this thing. It's hard for them to associate this picture with another reality. And sign languages, you know a lot of them, and this is also a system of alternative communication. They may be complex as Russian Sign Language, and they may be simplified. Special simplified sign languages created for people with learning difficulties. This was a short list of ways of expression, and now we're talking about augmentative tools. By tools I mean things that we can use to communicate. They may have different types. This we call a whiteboard. Before they were real whiteboards, but now they are tables, but we call them whiteboards in our practice. This whiteboard is really a table. We can have card books. There is a set of tables together in a book, and it can be filled in with cards. This is an individual vocabulary for a person. This is their kind of physical tongue that they use to articulate meanings, because they communicate with the help of those books with cards. A whiteboard or a table may include different symbols. They may be detachable or not detachable. This option allows one to see both the user, their face. We can detach symbols and move them around. So this depends on the capabilities of the individual, both sensory, motoric, and intellectual. And we have electronic devices. It is also a certain table, and it can play back speech. Here you see different games or leisure types, so that the child can ask for a certain activity. It plays back Russian words. Piano. You can build sentences with words like more and stop. This is very expensive but very simple. Yes, it's as expensive as a tablet computer, as a full tablet computer. No one knows why, but this is a rather simple device with vocal playback. Now we use tablet computers, iPads or Android systems or Windows systems. You can use them like that. Here you see the table as well, and the child can press the area to tell what they want, and they can build sentences out of these individual symbols. It pronounces the words, I want clay. I want sculpting clay. And even more advanced systems could be used, but we think that this system is probably the best. Here you see it as a full dictionary, and it works as a standard book. Here you can build up sentences. I want to go to a museum. I want to go to a museum. Unfortunately, the applications that are used in these devices don't always allow us to build correct sentences in Russian, because they use only the base forms of the words. And this is an issue by itself, but certainly these high-tech means that allow for speech playback make communication faster and make it more accessible for communication partners without disabilities. It becomes easier for them to understand the user. They don't have to be standing right next to them to see the picture. These applications are not very widespread, and I think you will mostly see people using low-tech devices. Whiteboards, tables, card sets, detachable cards, but step-by-step electronic devices are being used more and more, and they're more used among people on the spectrum or among people with motor disabilities. They have it quite easy to move between those menus in an application, and they have a need to utter long sentences. We're going to see some more tools. These are communication books. This particular young boy has a large A4 book, vocabulary book. It can be folded out to become even larger. It's not always very convenient, but they are very good. But as you see, for a person to use this book in a communication, it's important to consider the space where they can fold it out and tell you something with the help of this tool. Or maybe you should hold the book for them so that they can show you. You can help them flip the pages if they have a serious motor impairment. This user, as you see, has additional holds for the pages so that he will not struggle flipping them, because he has a difficulty in motoric system. These communicators, I have shown you, these devices. They not always have 4 symbols, they can have 8, 16, 32, depending on the specific user, depending on the size of their vocabulary. Now, transferring ideas. You can transfer the card physically to a person that communicates with them. You can detach it from the book and hand it over. This means drink, and they understand what I want to do. Usually it expresses a need or a want or a wish, but not always like that. It may be a comment, like a different person is seen drinking. Everything in our understanding here depends on the context and on our own imagination, and on our own ability to understand their communication. So we should evaluate the communication situation in general. This direct handover is the most common way of educating. It's the way communication is taught to individuals with ASDs. This method is wholly built upon handing over cards, and this is a method that you will probably see in your practice. Direct instructions. Direct indication. Direct indication means pointing with a finger or pointing at a table when combining words into a sentence. Put the clay, pick up the pen, draw with a pen, draw with paint. This is the mode of communication, and the third mode of communication is used by individuals with severe motor impairment, where they cannot point at things or indicate, but they can look and they can understand things. Let us use this method. Imagine yourself not being able to show anything, to say yes or no, or to nod. How are you going to use this device, this tool? By pointing with my eyes, yes. This is called scanning. We look where the individual looks. That's why the tool is transparent and it's only 4 pieces, so that I can trace the eyes of the user. The tool may look different. Sometimes a table is not transparent, but there is a window in the middle, so I can track the eye motions of the user and understand their communication. Some users see this as a too flimsy thing. If something is highlighted in red and it has pictures upon it and it's not transparent, maybe it will be easier for them to recognize the image. A whole book may be made up out of those transparent tables. This is also an option. Another option here, visual forms can be used. Communicating devices use voice playback, and touch communication can also be used when we show things to people or use Braille script when touch is engaged. If what we described before is really communication, but what the user of alternative communication uses, and then there is another big class of tools, this is visual support. This is something that helps somebody understand what other people tell them. It can be used as a schedule, as a set of rules, as you see here, and the previous speaker has highlighted this with visual support and a table that was located on one's chest. In our kitchen, in the middle, you see the set of rules, and in a museum, such set of rules can also be applicable. And these are very simple: no shouting, no sitting on the floor, no throwing things, no clapping. But you can ask for things, you can sit, you can eat, you can do things with your hands. These rules may be ad hoc for a specific group. For example, sitting on the floor is not a relevant restriction for other groups, but in this group there is a person who likes sitting on the floor in the doorway and meeting people like that, which can be dangerous and not convenient. Why do we need this? We are familiar with our social rules. They are not spoken. We do not discuss them. Entering a room, we understand that it might not be possible to sit there, to throw things around, to shout, and so on. But for children who don't use spoken word, have not been taught these rules, there was no tool for them to understand the rules. Why and how should they know that this and this is not possible, while that and that is possible and allowed? They have no other way of knowing these rules. By visualizing this, we can give them an opportunity to understand what is not allowed and what is allowed, and organize their own behavior and be more independent. So we are coming to the end of our presentation. Alternative and augmentative communication should be used with consideration of the fact that all these tools create three opportunities for people. Two supportive opportunities that support the third one. They improve the ways of expression for an individual. They can ask for things, they can tell about things, they can comment, they can ask questions. This improves their understanding because it provides a support for elusive and stable words. And these two opportunities, expression and understanding, enable them to participate more in a situation, to be involved in activities, to help them become more autonomous, so that we do not decide for them, we do not choose for them, they choose for themselves. Organizing the environment, it's an important aspect. If you have a communication partner who uses alternative and augmentative communication, then here are the rules for you, or rather guidelines for communications. It's important, regardless of what tool is used, it's important to be ready to listen and understand, to listen and hear them. This is expressed in physical actions. You face the user of alternative communication. You are at the same level with their face. Sometimes it's not an appropriate stimulus for individuals with autism spectrum disorders, but other users of these communication tools, other people with developmental and learning disabilities, need to see the expression of your face, need to have eye contact. It's an important thing. So, if somebody comes using a wheelchair, it's important for you to be at the same level with them, to find a chair, to sit down, or maybe to kneel on one knee and stay at the same level with them. If you communicate with a user of alternative and augmentative communication, in the same manner as with other people with developmental and learning disabilities, it's important to keep calm, to express yourself clearly. If you're not familiar with a certain augmentative tool, and it's okay to not be familiar with them, then if your own signals are calm, then the individual will be calmed down, they will have contact with you, they will use the pictures, they will use signs, they will use natural gestures or special signs, but the contact will be there. It's important to understand that all these tools for the individual are their personal tools, they are their own language. By taking them from them, we are pulling at their physical tongue. So we might be interested in this tool, we might want to flip the pages, and many people are proud of this tool and they want to demonstrate it. And they are interested in showing the other people their way of communication. But still we should always ask them for their permission to touch their individual communication tools. This is very important. And you shouldn't show them to other individuals without their permission. That's their language. It's important to talk to the person and not about the person. And so if there is an accompanying individual and you want to explain the situation, you want to clarify the communicating abilities of these people, you should address them first. And you should talk to this important partner in the situation, not just to the accompanying person. Most of individuals who use alternative communication, you have seen them and you have seen those tools here. They need time to turn it on, to place it, to press the buttons. They need time. That's why pauses are important and patience is important. Sometimes their reaction to something that you show or you tell may take 20 seconds. We ask them, do you want to drink? Are you thirsty? Should we stop? Should we continue? And it takes 20 to 30 seconds, maybe even a minute. And we only then can understand that our message has been received and the action happens that corresponds to our message. Sometimes alternative communication users are familiar with one tool, and maybe in responding to your question or in asking a question, they would use something familiar. They may ask you using a picture, but maybe they can ask something using a gesture or a sign. And so you should consider that they need time to prepare themselves for this other method of communication. It's important for us to emphasize important points in our communications. Besides narrowing down the flow of communication, we have to emphasize the key words. To emphasize them with tone, with intonation, to put an accent on them, or maybe emphasize them with gestures, with pauses, following the key word. Another important aspect here, which has already been highlighted before, is collaboration with the accompanying individuals. A lot of non-typical behavior, awkward behavior, confusing behavior can be present. It may be not familiar to us. We can have observed this behavior in other individuals, but we don't know what it means in this particular individuals. Sometimes destructive forms of behavior can be possible, but in general just deviant behavior, non-standard behavior, and it's important to keep up the contact with the accompanying person and having a silent agreement with them, to collaborate, to cooperate with them. The more we cooperate, the more calmness there will be for the person that we want to engage in communication. The more familiar the situation will be for them, and the more opportunity they have to get back into the mode that is familiar to us, to remove obstacles between us, or maybe for us all to solve the issue in question. Talking about emphasizing the key words, it's important to consider your own facial gestures. You may exaggerate your facial gesture. You may express your happiness more, you may express your surprise more, because sometimes the words are not understandable, but they want to see the facial gestures, the intonations, the rate of speech, the tempo. With the physical environment, we have several recommendations. They're quite obvious, I think. We should pick a calm, quiet place. For many people who use alternative communications, it's important to shut out background noise. They need borders, they need boundaries for their communication space. In a museum it might be complicated because they have large rooms, but maybe some part of the tour may be presented in a small room, shut out from the flow of visitors, where nothing distracts from the presentation. Nothing requires more attention resources than necessary. You have to minimize unnecessary stimuli. If somebody is guiding on a tour, it's better that nobody distracts them from communication with our visitors. We should cut down on noises. Lighting should be appropriate, because for some individuals, bright lights are painful, especially for people with ASDs. It's an issue for them. For myself, for example, I see this bright light, and this is an overstimulation for me. Sometimes it's beautiful, but it's hard for an individual. They may like everything, but just the lighting throws it all aside. I'm quite tolerable to this, but maybe they like the bright light and they see only the light. They are distracted from everything else. There is another interesting aspect of lighting. In electronic devices, if the light is falling onto the screen with a certain angle, then the image on screen is not well visible. And so the reaction of the user might be attenuated even more, or even our reaction may take longer. If you demonstrate something, if you show something for an alternative communication user, it's important to consider the background. If you are showing some colorful pictures, some photos, and you are there depicted against the background of a very bright painting, then you may become invisible for them. It's better to have the most neutral, the most bland background available, so that the symbols are better understood. And you should consider having some room for the alternative communication tools, like they're put here, but for somebody telling something, it's better to have a small table ahead of them to consider some space for those individuals to place their tools upon, so that the overall environment becomes calmer for them. We're not fussing around with placing their communication tools. And please be ready to, yes, things going south, be ready that you present some message and they have a different subject to discuss, because they have considered this for a long time. And that's okay. Sometimes it happens like a person comes to us all, and we're thinking about something important to us ourselves, and we begin talking about it. So it's better to support them in their choice of subject and to talk to them on the subject of their choice. Maybe we are talking to a child and we want to describe them the plan of actions, and they ask us whether we are married, whether we have children, or maybe what dress I had on my wedding day. And if you have time for that, you should allocate time enough for answering such questions. We have children like that in our groups that want to discuss important subjects, things important for them, and then they will be ready to listen to things. But this is familiar to any human. So on that one hand, we have the communication objective, conveying a message, following the plan. But in our communication, there are a lot of very natural small talk on no particular subject, which create this feeling of connection to another person, of communion with a different person. And maybe an individual with learning disabilities maybe will remember just this beautiful, nice young girl who talked to them, and she is married. If we take up that subject. And this would be the main experience for them. This was a new person that was talking to them on something. And then there was some presentation, but they don't remember this. And maybe a visitor, especially a visitor with autism spectrum disorders, might find among those new acquaintances a specialist on the subject that can discuss a topic that interests them: insects, transport, cars, lighting, light bulbs. This might be very interesting for the visitor. And it's important to allocate time, therefore, for fulfilling real communication to take place. These are all means that support our communication, support the behavior, make an individual more independent, more autonomous. And this is the end goal of all communications, of all context of all friendship that we have. That's it. These are our three heroes on the painting and before it. We're slightly over our time limit, so we have time literally for 2 questions, if there are any questions. I have a question that might seem stupid, but how do you broaden the vocabulary of an individual? Well, there are many ways. How do you do it yourself? No, some people use strange words and you ask them what this is. Or maybe you are shown this and they tell you that's what it's called. And you may forget and they repeat the word to you. That's how the device is called. Or maybe another way, there is something interesting around this person in the environment, and they want to ask for it. So if you give them a tool to help name this, they will use it. I mean, my question is whether it's you who control the broadening of their vocabulary, or it's them deciding for themselves. Both ways, it's really a combination of both. On the one hand, we are observing this individual with a communication difficulty, and we try to see what emits a reaction in them, and we try to make it reproducible in their life, to do more of this thing. And when they understand this idea that any language can bring them the opportunity to reproduce more activities in life, then their understanding of communication may progress very much, and they begin acquiring the interests. And they ask you, what is this around them? What things surround them in their environment? Very often it depends on the level of their skills in other fields, but it's always about our being perceptive. When we are perceptive to this individual, then it happens. If there is somebody with intact intelligence but with speech difficulties, they're able to create communicative dictionaries for themselves. You may know Ivan Bokaidov, an activist from St. Petersburg. He's a wheelchair user with several disabilities. He created a special smartphone app which allows him to communicate with anybody, because some applications are very expensive. And he just made one for himself, and he uses it, and he expands upon it. And now the last question. I'm sorry, there is one more thing here. We should understand that our passive vocabulary is different from our active vocabulary in any person. For example, in a foreign language, we all can understand more than we can say. And this is also a factor in communication. We should consider this. We can see this pause, this hesitation. This person means something, but they lack the word yet. And so we are picking the word for them. But this is hard work. I don't know. We need to consider that the individual might not have the intellectual capability to grasp the new word from the first use. Usually it requires using the word several times. Hello, my name is Lisa. So from your experience, could you tell us how widely are alternative and augmentative communication means used in everyday life? I see it mostly in specialized institutions, as in your center, but in everyday life, I hardly see them at all. So, are they used in the families? Is there any transfer of this communication to everyday life, to social situations, at a museum? This is a big issue on itself, working with parents, working with society as a whole, socialization of those individuals. But from your experience, to what extent does it work? Do you have examples? Yes, it works more or less. It depends on parents, it depends on specialists communicating with the family, it depends on how well we convey this idea of communication. how adept the child is at this, and we should invite the parents so that they can see it, not from hearsay, that the child uses this tool and the child becomes more adult, understands their needs, expresses their needs. If they could only cry and have a tantrum beforehand, now they are able to express this with words in a socially acceptable way. And when the parents see this for themselves, or maybe you can record a video for them, then the parents get motivated to use those tools at home. Maybe they will use less of those tools at homes than at our institution, at our center. This is a separate field of work for a specialist to encourage people to use those tools more outside of our center. And this is a question to us all. Let's go back to this slide. To increase involvement in situations and activities. This depends on the quality of those situations and whether people around them are able to listen to them, to hear what they want to communicate, to give them this role of a more active individual. Beforehand, they were able to cry, and now they're expressing their needs. They're asking for specific things, and you have to deal with it. That's the way. And then our society has this anxiety, this fear of somebody using alternative communication, and this will impair their speech development. But we all know, maybe not all of us literally, but people who are familiar with research know that it's not true. Alternative communication creates a better support for speech development. It's one of the best supports, not the only one, but a really good opportunity. And many people using alternative means or augmentative means, they're called augmentatives because they support real speech, and yes, they improve their speech. And for many parents, this is a very intimate feeling, a very strong sensation, a very strong emotion, when a child that was unable to speak for 15 years and now is communicating with you as a parent. This is very emotional, and they never questioned this. Their only question is why they had never access to this before. As a society, as a nation, we're not very familiar with those tools, unfortunately. Thank you very much for this.